I Heart by Daniel Johnson. Copyright 2020 by Renaissance. Andre dropped by the barracks of the Queen's Own 357 Regiment. As luck would have it, they were refitting for an expedition to the Afghan hills. Sergeant P.F. Miller was on base directing the refit of his company and drilling his men. Andre met him in the troop's mess. Sergeant P.F. Miller was a tall, middle-aged Scotsman, with a body as bold as his boisterous voice.
Aye, well, if it don't be me old martini, Andy,
he said, stepping towards him.
I'm doing peachy, said Andy. The men look splendid, he said, looking around the room.
Aye, they'll do. Nothing like the road crowd, I'll warrant. You nae come by to sign up again, have you?
Heavens, no, said Andy.
So how's that lassie you've been talking about all the time?
You ever be able to find her?
Yes, said Andre. I found my Elizabeth, and she's as marvelous as my dreams portrayed her.
Mills noticed that Andre's gaze seemed a little distracted.
Well, what is it, laddie?
Andre shrugged.
Come on, laddie. You know your old sergeant would always read you, just like a Maudi at 200 paces.
I know, Sergeant, said Andre. It's just, what right do I have to inconvenience you with my troubles?
Come on, laddie. 'Tis no burden too great that a man will not bear for the regiment.
Oh, Sergeant, Andre said.
He paused for a moment, then the sergeant looked at him patiently.
Sergeant, Andre began, you have been around most places in the world, have you not?
Aye, 'tis true, laddie. Mountains, rivers, through desert and jungle, among the brown heathen and the yellow. Yes, laddie, I've seen it all.
Well, Andre began awkwardly, have you ever been to a place called the real world? I believe that's what you call it.
Laddie, have you been spending too many hours in that tea house lately? I've warned you about those heathen pipe houses, haven't I?
Goodness, no, Andre said firmly. It's just something Elizabeth said. It was something like, I want to know who you really are. And who are you in the real world?
Mills paused a moment, then began to study him. Andre looked at him uncomfortably.
What is it?
What is your real name?
The sergeant asked.
Andre William Watts III, he replied without hesitation.
Where were you born?
Eastborough, London, he replied.
Sergeant Mills studied him closely. Andre looked at him confused.
Hold on a minute, laddie. 375EE24F,
he said, as if he were speaking to himself. There was a brief blink in the light around them, and everything seemed to slow down. He turned to Andre and began to speak in a more casual tone. All hint of his accent was now gone. Amazing, he said, as he looked at Andre. Andre looked at him confused.
You really are Andre, and that is not your persona. You have no other name?
Andre slowly shook his head.
A sentient AI. I heard characters like you existed. I just never believed it. Do you know what the portal is?
Andre shook his head.
What is your ID?
I don't know what you're talking about, Andre said, becoming nervous.
Hey, well, you had better sit down for this one, laddie,
Mills said, slipping back into his accent. Andre sat down, and Mills explained that this world was all just a game, a simulation of a period long ago. Andre was just a player in that game. There was an entire universe of other such games in something called cyberspace. They all had characters similar to him, but the setting and the types of games were as different from each other as the pictures that hung in Lord Elgin's estate. Many people participated in these games or worlds as actors on a stage do. They came from another universe called the outside world, or the real world.
Are they gods? Andre asked.
Nay, laddie, they may be gods. They're only people, just like you and I.
Mills continued to explain that Andre was something called an AI, an artificial intelligence. Someone had created him, and he now lived in the cyber world. He could never get to the outside world because the laws of science did not allow it. He kept telling Andre that he was special, and that no other NPC, non-player characters were sophisticated enough to have something like an actual consciousness. Andre was becoming more and more confused. Finally, he burst out in frustration. If I'm so damn special, why can't I go to the real world?
You are very special, but you may be flesh and blood.
This seemed to confuse Andre even more, and now he was beginning to look depressed. Mill's eyes filled with compassion. You mean my life, my love, and my Elizabeth has all been just a lie? Just an illusion?
Nay, laddie. Looking at you, I can see that it's all too real.
Yes, but I will never see my Elizabeth in the real world. Andre's chest grew heavy. I will always remain only a part of her dreams, but never a part of her heart. The emotions in Andre welled up in Mills now.
Look, laddie, I have a wee bit of an idea. I can set up a meeting for you with your Elizabeth in the real world, if you like.
Andre looked up hopefully. You can do that? He said. You will do that?
Aye, laddie.
I can do that, he said, dropping in his accent. And the theme of the summer was Come Unto Me and Love Will Find a Way, he sung. What? Andre asked.
Sure enough if I be a god.
How can you do that? Andre asked.
Programming god.
Andre's eyes brightened as he looked at him.
I'll figure out a way to swap the tags, so you can borrow my ID. At least that'll get you to the portal, and you can meet Elizabeth there.
Top hole, Andre explained.
You have been listening to I Heart You by Daniel Johnson. Copyright 2020 by Renaissance Productions. For this and other writings, go to genesis2112.com or search Sue Lee Daniel Johnson on Kindle, iBooks, or Barnes & Noble.